there, how are you?
Very well. How are we doing at SNACC HQ?
We're doing grand. Thank you. Grand like a piano, or as somebody once said to me, or like larceny. We're going to talk about Scottish connections now. And before we do, I just wanted to apologise for the technical snafu we had earlier and hope everyone can now hear me okay. I can see myself on the screen, so I apologise if my camera's working.
Hello.
Hello, Ian.
Hi.
Earlier this afternoon, we heard from Colin Gray, and he mentioned Scottish connections, which is what we're going to talk about in the next half an hour. With me are Ailie McKinnon and Ian Houston. By way of introduction, Ailie McKinnon has served as Deputy Head of the Scottish Government's USA office since June 2023, working to strengthen the cultural, political and economic ties between Scotland and the US. Prior to moving to DC, Ailie held a variety of jobs across the Scottish Government space in Edinburgh, including working on electoral reform legislation, international climate change, food and drink promotion, and most recently, green hydrogen export. Ailie was born in the small Ayrshire village of Ochiltree, home to the house with the green shutters immortalised in the famous Scottish novel by George Douglas Brown. Hello, Ailie. Ian Houston is the former longtime executive director of the American Foreign Service Association, representing the interests of US diplomats around the world. He has worked in Congress and as a leader in the humanitarian and development arena. He is a global Scot, a writer for the Herald Scotland and Cornish papers, an honorary professor and lecturer at the University of the West of Scotland and Aberdeen. He serves as a trustee of the Robert Burns Ellisland Farm, an advisor to the Edinburgh Fringe, and is an ambassador for Black Professionals UK based in Scotland, and was also on the Scottish Connections Advisory Panel. Ailie, as it's the Deputy Head, you represent the Scottish Government in the US, and this includes government programmes and initiatives like Scottish Connections. So let's start with the what's, why's, where's, when's and how's of Scottish Connections. Ailie, can you tell me what it is and why it was created?
Thanks, Gus. If I had to put it simply, I'd say that Scottish Connections as a government programme is an acknowledgement that Scottish diaspora, as diverse and as large as it is something that we as a government value. That's what we're saying. It's a statement. It's the government putting its stamp on something and saying this is a thing we care about. It's something that we acknowledge, and it's something that we are going to proactively engage and foster. In sort of government speak, that means that in April 2023 at Tartan Week last year, the Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs and Culture, Angus Robertson, who'll be familiar to some of you, he launched a framework. So, I was going to say a piece of paper. It's actually many pieces of paper. It's kind of a long read. But he launched something called the Scottish Connections Framework. And that does several things. It sort of defines what we imagine the Scottish diaspora to be. It explains why the Scottish Government values and sees that as something worth engaging and fostering to encourage it to flourish. And then it makes a series of commitments of things that we will do, not only to ensure that Scotland as a nation is sort of activating and benefiting from its extensive diaspora, but also to make sure that Scotland is giving back. You in a relationship, and as a diplomat, everything's all about relationships. We can't only ask for favours. We have to offer something to our networks around the world. So that's what I would say Scottish Connections is. It's that dialogue between Scotland and its diaspora, and critically for me, it's what the government does. It's owning our diaspora as a government.
I think it's to be applauded that the government really put its shoulder to this particular wheel, and it's to be applauded that the government had the foresight to recruit people from the diaspora to help in the creation of Scottish Connections. Ian, you were one of those people. Could you talk to us about what the work involved in the months and days before Angus launched the initiative, and then talk to us about how the initiative has grown and developed since then?
First of all, thank you. It's nice to be with you, Gus. I wish I were there in person, so sorry not to be there with everyone. So, and it's nice to be with Ailey. I must say to everyone here, I don't know for sure who is in the audience right now, but I would say if there were one person in the audience or 1,000 people in the audience, the Scottish Government Office here in the USA just does fantastic work. Some of you know that directly, but I just want to give a testimony of how extraordinary it is what they do with such a small team, and how they engage with such a variety of people and entities, and just how hard they work, and now over many years. So I think we all owe these individuals, Ailey being here, a real debt of gratitude for what they do. So yeah, that's a good question. I think that, as Ailey mentioned, the launch of the Scottish Framework was a wee bit ago, but the establishment of the advisory panel, Gus, is about October of 2024. That's when it was officially launched, this advisory panel. It really is designed to give guidance on priorities, limitations, challenges, just a variety of thoughts and ideas, comprised of individuals such as myself, but those who come from sport and tourism, arts sector, academia, Global Scot Network, and so business and economic trade, the culinary sector, Scottish whiskey. So it's comprised of such a variety of individuals who have certain expertise, and beyond that, a real desire to help. I couldn't agree more with you with the observation you made, Gus, about credit to the Scottish Government for really carrying this, first establishing the framework, which was long overdue, but that really required some leadership. One of the best sessions in the Parliament, I feel, was when the framework was actually launched. The discussion that you can actually go back and watch and listen to was one of the more uplifting sessions that I've ever seen in the Scottish Parliament. It was very supportive, collaborative, individuals from across parties saying what an important idea and initiative this was. And now it has really taken root and has texture. It's not that these things weren't happening before, but it really laid out a strategic framework and roadmap to go forward, now comprised of an advisory panel, but still there are many unsung heroes that are directly involved in the implementation, including yourself, Gus. So, but people in the room that are carrying this initiative forward.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to jump forward to a question that really is about the nature of diaspora, and it comes on the heels of the session we've just had with a look at heritage as one form of connection to the diaspora. But Scottish Connections proposes a definition of the diaspora which goes wider than the traditional perspective of Scottish heritage or ancestry, and it's entirely consistent with the outlook of the Chicago Scots, who welcome everyone who's Scottish by birth, by heritage, or simply by inclination. And I quote, the Scottish Government's definition of diaspora goes beyond bloodlines to value anyone who has or wants to have a connection with Scotland. The Scottish Government's definition of diaspora is therefore broad and welcoming. Ailey, can you talk about why that's important?
Sure, that is probably one of the, even though it's kind of in the first couple of pages of the document, it's one of the features of it which I'm most proud of. I don't necessarily agree with Lord Cochrane's statement that Scotland needs all the help it can get, but I do believe we need all the people and connections that we can get. And sometimes, you know, I'm someone that's moved to the United States fairly recently in the past couple of years. I look and sound very Scottish. I'm an American's idea of what a Scottish person looks like. And that means that, you know, when I meet someone for the first time, they're always really excited to tell me about their Scottish connections. And that might be the ancestry that they've either researched through their family tree or through some kind of DNA testing. It might be that they visited 10 years ago and they had an amazing time. It might be that they did a semester at Napier University and they're still friends with some of the people that they met there. And, you know, sometimes people say to me, is that annoying? You know, people are always asking questions about Scotland, and I don't know that I knew this before I started this job, but coming into it, I've realized that that's the biggest compliment. If someone is looking to connect with you in that way, it's a huge compliment. It's a privilege to represent a country which people want to find an affinity with, and it's not for the government, I think, to put a judgment on, you know, a value judgment on people's connections and to say that one is more valuable than the other. And I think that that's something that's consistent really across Scottish government policy. It's not just in how we engage our diaspora, but Gus, you mentioned in your introduction that I used to work in elections policy, and one of my first jobs in government was working on a bill which gave the right to vote in Scottish elections to all foreign nationals resident in Scotland. Because it's about saying that it's not just people that are born Scottish that have a say, that are important. You know, that applies across the diaspora. It applies across, you know, whether it's our alumni network or educational diaspora, as I mentioned, we call it the lived diaspora, people that, you know, for one reason or another lived in Scotland and have returned or travelled on somewhere new. Their affinity is valuable, and in fact, they're even more sort of valuable because they have gone out into the world and they can then, you know, tell the story of Scotland as it is today to their networks, to their contacts, and, you know, help share it with even more people. So I think an expansive definition is only of benefit, and to restrict yourselves to one sort of narrow definition would be to limit the impact that Scottish connections can have.
You remind me, Ailey, of a moment that happened at this very conference some years ago, and it was our friend Kenny McCaskill, who was at the conference, with whom Henry McLeish, who we'll hear from tomorrow, has written a couple of great books. And I'd mentioned that the mission of the Chicago Scots was to nourish the Scottish identity. And Kenny kind of looked uncomfortable when I said this. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, there's one word in there that kind of moves us in a direction that I don't think is in everyone's best interest. And it was very simply an innocuous word. It was "the." So if we accept that our mission formally was to nourish the Scottish identity, and he said there's so many different Scottish identities. So by removing that word, the nourish Scottish identity, it's much more about choice and people's inclination to be an opt-in. You know, so it was a very powerful thing that changed our whole organization and our outlook. We started with our bylaws, but then it began to programmatically kind of be reflected in the things we were doing and our events and our membership and so on. Very powerful, and I think Scottish Connections is traveling in a similar way. And Ian, I'd like to ask a question about something you recently posted under the title "The Global Footprint of the University of Aberdeen and the International Reach of Scottish Higher Education." Of Scotland's diaspora, you write, "Few nations possess that type of asset. Scotland does. Harnessing and stimulating the power of it will be a massive economic and social positive for Scotland. It's encouraging to see the Scottish Connections framework of the Scottish Government prioritising this. Can you tell me why you're encouraged, and why is Scottish Connections so important?"
Well, this focus, thank you for that. And again, Ailey's points were excellent. I couldn't agree more with what she said. there are 83,000 individuals who come in Scotland to go to Scottish universities globally every year. So this represents about one third, everyone, of the student population of universities across Scotland. That's extraordinary. I'm not sure what nation could actually say that. That's in 1 year, everyone. If we take the window of 5, 10, 20, 30 years, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and families that have sent their kids to do this, who are also touched and then become a part of this broader family of Scotland, who travel to see their, say, child graduate or their daughter or son graduate university in Scotland. It's a huge group of people. So the focus, which I so appreciate and I think is so valuable, to see this as an asset. Universities in the past, the larger universities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, St Andrews, Aberdeen, that have larger alumni networks here in the States or in North America or around the world, tended to be a little bit, and understandable, a little bit stovepipe directly linked to the brand of that university for purposes of recruitment, for purposes of financial contributions. Completely understandable, makes sense. They should continue to do that. But what happened over time is some of the smaller universities, Stirling, University of West of Scotland, Glasgow Caledonian University, I say smaller, but these are extraordinary institutions that are doing remarkable things, research, etc. They were being lost a bit in the narrative of what Scottish universities are providing for the world. So what we need to do with Scottish Connections is ensure that the broader message of the family of universities are carrying forward a message of what makes Scotland so attractive for individuals to attend these universities, and that those who have taken a degree, done a study abroad, or families that have been impacted in the Alexandria community where you are, Gus, that is deep. The Washington, D.C. area connections to Scottish universities probably is as deep as any community across the nation. How are we mobilizing these people? Do they simply take the degree from that institution, come back and with pride get messages from the university that say a professor is in town, come meet with that individual? No, and I think what I so appreciate what the Scottish government is doing, that literally last night, again for St Andrews Day celebrations, they're bringing alumni networks together in this area to connect with Global Scots, to hear from Colin, to hear from the British Embassy. And there's a collective dynamic that it spurs a desire to contribute to Scotland, not only the university, but to Scotland, and to carry that message forward. Everyone, it's a sleeping giant. So the fact that we're putting resources behind this and energy and focus, and I give the Parliament, the Scottish government, real credit for doing this. It will have benefits that will make a huge difference in raising the profile of Scotland and communities across North America.
Thank you, Ian. You mentioned the benefits flow both ways. Ailey, you gave us a really insightful look at Scottish Connections flowing one way, but you also have the Scottish Connections Fund. Could you tell me what that is and what its objective is?
Sure. I will talk about the fund, but I will just say the fund is just one of the ways that we sort of support the diaspora. So I would say that there are myriad other ways where it's by making resources, online resources available, whether that's through Speak Gaelic. If your organization wants to promote Gaelic learning, we have ready-made resources that are free to access. If you want to put a mailer out to your newsletter about how to organize a Burns night, we have resources. If you have a contact that wants to set up a business in Scotland or wants to know more about that, we have resources. So that's almost one of the roles of my office, is to be that connecting point between the diaspora and the Scottish government. I will say that, Ian, I'm very grateful to Ian for applauding the Parliament and the government for sort of making the framework happen. But we can't deliver it alone as a government. It's not something that can be imposed on the diaspora. For the most part, it will actually be delivered by the diaspora, and we have to give people the sort of tools and resources to be able to do that. But much of the delivery sits, in the diaspora itself. And I do acknowledge many people here are here representing organisations which are charitable organisations. People are involved with this. I'm lucky enough to get paid to represent Scotland, but many people here, give up their valuable free time to help foster their local Scottish community. And I do not want to oversell the fund. I appreciate it's a very small pot of money, and it does have limited sort of eligibility criteria. But hopefully over time we can keep it going and we can build it up. But it is a pot of money that has been available for the past 2 years to organisations and individuals of all types to help them to help fund projects that support the delivery of Scottish connections. I don't believe that this year's recipients have been announced yet, but to give a flavour of one of the US projects that was funded last year, two of your fellow Global Scots, Lita Jackson and Lorraine Bell, put together a project with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society to look at what resources are out there to support descendants of enslaved peoples to research their Scottish history. And the money that the Scottish Government helped provide supported a researcher in Scotland and a researcher in the US to delve into that challenging history and think about, here's a part of the diaspora that we can, we're perhaps not reaching because the way that, resources and genealogical resources are set up, they're not really designed for someone with that sort of story. But is there something that we can do to help them trace their Scottish heritage? So that's just an example of one project which was funded last year, and that's really in the heritage and genealogy space. But I know that in sort of other geographies, it supported literature showcasing, it supported musical collaboration between Scotland and other sort of Celtic folk traditions and other sort of geographies. So it's really varied, and it's we look for creativity, we look to support new ideas which just wouldn't be possible to happen without the government support, because there's already a lot of amazing things happening. It's where are the gaps, and where can a little bit of government incentive help move things forward. So that's the Scottish Connections Fund. Closed for this year, but if you're interested, look out for 2025.
Thank you very much, Ailey. I'd like to ask another question of Ailey before I come to you, Ian. And it's on behalf of the organisations both around the table on Zoom and around the country. What can we do to support and make the Scottish Connections work better? How can we support it?
Well, I would say that organisations like those represented here are already doing an enormous amount. I mean, this conference, in its very nature, it's Scottish Connections. It's people coming together to say, we already have this community, we already have these ties. How do we sustain them? How do we grow them? How do they serve? What relevance do they have in the 21st century? And how do we continue that? And that that's a huge part of what Scottish Connections is. So it's already happening. There's some very sort of small and practical things that organisations can do. We have a global community, a Scottish Connections directory on scotland.org, which is the website for Scotland. And we ask that all sort of Scottish interest organisations, whether they are heritage organisations, affinity organisations, Highland dance schools, pipe bands, clan associations, you can make it a lot easier for people who are interested in exploring their Scottish connections. Help us make it easier for them to find you. Sign up, register your organisation on that global directory, and I hope that that also has co-benefits for the people that do that, because it helps drive membership and interest. At an individual level, we want to talk to you. We want people to know what we're doing. We want people to know what our priorities are, so that if you're someone that thinks you might be able to help, or you have something to contribute, you understand what we're looking for. Reach out to my office. Let me put you on our newsletter. Let us sort of start that two-way dialogue, where if you're taking a look at what we've got coming up over the next quarter and you think that's something I'd like to get involved with, let's open that door. Those are sort of very practical things. In the more sort of longer term space, I think it is about looking at sort of organizational purpose and direction. Do considering what is your purpose, and what are the points and the frameworks, whether that's, are there areas where you could be doing more to help us promote Ian focused in study? Could you help us connect universities with audiences? Yes, we get a huge amount of students from the US, but that's becoming ever more important to the sustainability of Scottish universities. If you have people in your communities, like young people, send them to scotland.org. Tell them, I've heard that Scotland's an incredible place to study, a very safe place, great quality of life, great quality of teaching, great career opportunities. Help us tell that story. And why I'm saying, please sign up for our newsletters is so you know that stuff, so you have those facts, and you have those tidbits to share with your network. So sorry, I feel like I'm running over time, and that's maybe what someone's saying in the chat, but there are loads of ways. Get in touch, and let's talk about it, is what I'll say.
Thank you, Ailey. I'm being told that we're running close to time. I've got a closing question for both of you, and then I see there are some questions and comments in the chat that I'd like to get to and invite from in the room here. Ian, what would you like to see in the future for Scottish Connections?
I would like to see individuals who are more conversant and have a little bit more depth in understanding modern contemporary Scotland and all its manifestations. I would like to see Scottish Connections and individuals who are directly connected with that to be vehicles of light and encouragement to help people to understand what is making Scotland right now innovative. The history of Scotland is so deep and rich and motivating and attractive. There's plenty of information there, but Scotland is so in need of a deeper understanding of what's happening now to spur investment into Scotland across sectors, not just the commercial sector. I think, Gus and everyone, what I'd like to see is when we talk of Scotland as now a modern contemporary Scotland, that we're inclusive, and those of us here in North America are inclusive of the social enterprise sector, are inclusive of the charitable sectors, are inclusive of ethnic minority-led businesses, women-led businesses, women-led organizations and networks, so that we have a deeper sense of that. So that, Gus, I would like the Scottish Connections to get to a point where a flow of resources going back into Scotland is supporting, yes, foreign direct investment, trade, etc., but it's helping charities that are operating there. It's helping universities. It's helping individuals and networks that need our support beyond the traditional caricature of Scotland that sometimes can be perpetuated. And we need to be careful that we're inclusive of the realities of what's happening in Scotland. Yeah, that's what I'd like Scottish Connections to go in that direction.
Ian, there's one other question I'd love to ask you, and identity is made manifest in people's actions and the values that they carry with them and inform their identities. I think, yes, blood and birthplace will always be really important and loom large over our identity, but values is really what makes us who we are. And the work you have done this morning or this afternoon, I spoke to Sir John McEwen about Rory McEwen, more of us need to know more about what Rory McEwen did and the work he did. You've been doing something similar with a similarly unknown person over here who I think the work you've done to shine a spotlight on Frances Wright help us kind of have a sense of who we are and the ways we are in the world. Would you talk just in the couple of remaining moments we have about that work?
Well, Frances Wright is an extraordinary individual born in Dundee, September 6, 1795. Lost her parents at a young age, was so enamored and inspired by the American experience, came to America, to New York City as 23 years old, and became one of the great women leaders in American history. She was a trailblazer for women's rights, an abolitionist before many were even talking about that. She knew Jefferson, she knew Madison, she was traveling at the most elite circles. She knew General Lafayette. She was an inspirer for James McCune Smith, who ended up going to Scotland to study at the University of Glasgow and became the first medical doctor. She's an extraordinary individual, Gus and everyone, that I feel should be at the level of a Susan B. Anthony, of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, because both of those individuals, Gus and everyone, they were trailblazers, they were remarkable women. But who did they say was their mentor? Frances Wright. Fanny Wright, born in Scotland, was the mentor to these luminating figures in American history and the women's rights movement of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Where is her narrative? The reason, Gus, why her narrative isn't before us is because the people at the time were dismissive of her because they weren't ready yet for her. They were a little bit more ready for Elizabeth Cady Stanton than Susan B. Anthony, a little bit more, not quite there. But with Frances Wright, she was too early. And so she paid a price by movements that pushed her out and characterized her in a very negative way. She's an extraordinary individual. So I will keep talking about Frances Wright, Fanny Wright, if you want to have me back for something else. And I'll keep writing about her. But thank you for asking that.
Thank you, Ian. It's really important that we all know who she is because it helps us be who we are. And I'm going to end now by quoting somebody who's not Scottish, but it's an important quotation from James Baldwin. If you know from whence you came, there really is no limit to where you can go. Ailey, Ian, thank you very much for being part of this fascinating discussion about Scottish connections. There are a couple of questions, Camilla. Yeah. Okay, I have a question from Bob Giles. Hello, Bob in Detroit. Hope my pals in Detroit are doing well. And it is cut off on the screen here. If communication is such an important part of increasing, global awareness, is it a matter of lack of funds or lack of education to do the outreach we all seem to need? Ailey or Ian, would you like to have a go at that one?
I guess I can have a go at it, although I'm not sure in terms of outreach, whether that's on the part of sort of Team Scotland, you know, as the collective, or whether we're thinking about organisations in the US. I would say that, you know, as a government official, I always wish I had more money to spend, and there's certainly, you know, things you can do with budget. But as I think has hopefully come through in my remarks, I think our our real asset is our people and our relationships and the existing reputation that we have. So I would say, in terms of achieving more, it is about that education piece. It is about making sure people understand who we are, what our strengths are, what we have to offer the world, whether that be in culture, business, education, the myriad ways that we interact with people around the world. So yes, I do think it is a matter of education, and as a government, there is an onus on us to communicate better, to make resources available, and critically to reach out to audiences that aren't in constant dialogue. And again, that's part of what we hope the Scottish Connections Fund will help us do, is help support us to reach out to new constituencies. So yeah, thank you for the question, Bob. I hope I understood it.
Yeah, and Gus, I have a response there also to Bob, if okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, I would just say congratulations to the Lions for beating the Packers last night. Other than that, a couple of things that Elia and others and Colin and Bex and the whole staff will be involved with already is Tartan Day coming up on April 6th. So it's just a reminder to everyone that Tartan Day was a Senate resolution signed by the president. It was a initiative really to put a focus on the contributions of Scottish Americans to American society. It wasn't meant directly just for New York. While it was passed in Washington, it wasn't meant just for Washington. It is for America. And so, Bob, you're in Detroit. I'm not sure if you're going to make it for Tartan Day out for the parade in New York. Maybe you've done that before. I just love Detroit as a city. There's no reason why we couldn't have a piper, at least on a street corner somewhere in Detroit on April 6th, or the mayor of Detroit issuing some sort of proclamation that says, we thank Scottish Americans for their contributions for Detroit and how they built Detroit. Same Gus for Chicago. Who else is wherever? You can pick up the banner of Tartan Day, and you don't have to make it to Manhattan in New York. You can do it right where you are, and do it in humble ways. Go visit a school, go to a high school, go just, like I say, hire a piper on a corner in a park. Let's make it a collective Tartan Day, not just New York or Washington. So that would be something I'd say to Bob.
Ian and Ailey, thank you very much. We had a terrific St. Andrew's Day celebration, and Colin was there in Chicago and hosted a terrific Toast to Scotland, which I do with an empty coffee cup now. But cheers to both of you for joining us today. And in the interest of keeping moving, I think I should pass the baton to the next session.
Okay, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.